الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله يا أيها المسلمون إن الله أوصانا في كتابه بتقواه فإنه قال بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أما بعد. Brothers, can I ask everyone to move as forward as possible, please, just to make room for those who want to come afterwards. Barakallahu feekum. Brothers and sisters, over the course of the last week approximately, we've all been keeping up to date with news that's been circulating throughout Western media outlets. And this news is concerning the toppling of the oppressive, brutal Assad regime in Syria and the liberation of those lands. And it's a moment of relief and joy, not only for Syrians who've suffered for over 5 decades, but it's also a moment of relief and joy and happiness for Muslims throughout the world. As having Iman embedded deep within our hearts warrants that we feel happiness during this stage of victory. And we're seeing footage of Syrians in huge numbers chanting the takbirat. We're seeing footage of young boys and women being released from the most notorious dungeon prisons within Syria itself. We're seeing footage of people who've lost all their families to the massacres and the atrocities that the Assad regime has carried out on its people. And these people, their difficulties and pains have been alleviated. And although it's a moment of joy and happiness, there are many Muslims that are feeling a sense of confusion. There are many Muslims amidst this staggering victory who are bogged down by conspiracy theories and geopolitical analysis and are failing to take part in the celebration of the toppling of this regime. Which begs the question, is there an inconsistency in the moral compass of Muslims when it comes to genocide, when it comes to murder, when it comes to siege, and when it comes to oppression? When we look at what's happening in Palestine, we unconditionally support the Palestinian people who are resisting oppression and have done so for over 7 decades. But when it comes to the Syrian suffering, there tends to be an inconsistency in the moral compass of not just Muslims, but non-Muslims alike, who are very supportive of the Palestinian uprising. And before we talk about the lessons that we can draw from the Syrian revolution itself, I'm going to speak a bit about how this revolution began, to give everybody an insight into the reality of this brutal regime and how this Syrian revolution was triggered. The Syrian revolution began in the year 2011. And despite the fact that the uprising had started during this period, the oppression, the tyranny, and the brutality had been ongoing ever since the father of Bashar himself, he ruled that particular country. And there are many examples of the atrocities and the massacres that he carried out upon the innocent Syrian populace. An example is in 1980, the massacre of Hama, where over 40,000 people were innocently massacred over the course of 3 weeks. Because that group of people, they obstructed certain commandments that the Assad regime were enforcing on the people. And these people called for freedom, for justice, their right to exercise their freedom of speech. As a result of this, these peoples were unjustly killed. In 2011, Assad merely furthered the tyranny and oppression that his father had laid the foundations for. And the Syrian people had undergone decades of oppression and suffering. Some of them having lost their grandparents, some of them having lost their parents at the tender ages of 9 or 10 and not having seen them for 20, 30 years. And in 2011, there were protests and demonstrations that were carried out by the Syrian people. And the fundamental purpose behind these protests was to demand the regime to step down, or to ask for their rights to be fulfilled, to stop the killing, to stop the torture, and to stop the incarceration of innocent Muslims throughout Syria. And in response, the Assad regime forces, they responded with violence and brutality. And among the protesters and among the demonstrators in 2011 were young children, teenagers, women, innocent people who wanted to see social reform in Syria, given the never-ending suffering. And there was a young boy who was 13 years of age. And he was taken by the Syrian regime and he was tortured brutally for weeks on end. The father had brought him to the protest to help him understand what the Islamic vision for a young boy should appear to be. That if you want to see change in your society, in your community, you have to do grassroots work. You have to play a pivotal role in forbidding evil, play a pivotal role in telling the people that they're doing wrong. So he brought his son to be a part of this big mission that Syrian people had for the betterment of their country, their children, their grandchildren, their offspring. And his son was abducted by the Assad regime in the process. After 3 weeks of no information regarding this young boy, the Assad regime forces turned up at the house of the boy's parents and they flogged the corpse on the doorstep. A 13-year-old boy whose body was full of scars and burnt marks, whose bones were shattered. There were clear signs of torture and oppression that was projected onto this young boy to disable him, to cause him pain and agony, but to keep him alive. And he's now lying on the doorstep of his parents, killed and massacred for nothing. And when the people in Dar'a at the time, they heard of the killing of Hamza Ali al-Khatib, who was just 13 years of age, it galvanized the biggest protest movement in Syria at the time. And this sparked off what's known to be today as the Syrian Revolution. And this is one example of many. And over the last week, namely since the 8th of December 2024, when rebel forces carried out offensive attacks and they toppled the Assad regime, we've been seeing shocking testimonies from people who've been direct victims of this oppression of the Assad regime. There are people who've been talking about the type of torture that they went through in prisons. There are children who are coming out of prisons who were born within that prison. Women went through sexual offenses and assaults. And this is the tip of the iceberg. It's only been nearly a week since the toppling of the regime. There are many testimonies to come. And what are the lessons that we can draw from this toppling that occurred within just 10 days of offensive attacks by rebel forces? Between 2011 to 2016, which were the periods of heightened conflict between the regime and the innocents, statistics state that nearly 600,000 innocents were massacred. That's a shocking statistic. It's a horrifying statistic. And that doesn't even account for the children that were found beneath the rubble. Certain numbers suggest that there were over 1 million innocents that were slaughtered over the course of just 5 years of conflict and siege and oppression. These numbers are unmatched, they're unprecedented. But victory always comes. It's the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the oppressor will never continue his tyranny, his injustice for eternity. There will come a time where Allah will cause the ruin of these oppressors, and it will happen overnight. And that's exactly what we saw in Syria. And it's a moment of rejoice and happiness for every single Muslim, irrespective of which ethnicity we're from and where we belong. It's a reason for us to chant the takbirat that this regime has been toppled. Because we look throughout the world and we see the suffering of Muslims everywhere. The Uyghur Muslims who were placed in concentration camps and persecuted. The suffering of Rohingyans who were tortured and brutal treatment is projected onto them. We see the suffering of Palestinians whose genocide is recognized internationally, yet nothing is done to remove that genocide. They were prevented from basic water and food. And in the process of observing all these sufferings, we become filled with mixed emotions. It affects the functionality of our day-to-day lives, and it should. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us in many different reports that we should have care and empathy. Sympathy differs from empathy. We're taught to place ourselves in the position of those who are suffering throughout the world. They shouldn't be treated as people that aren't related to us. Rather, we should treat them as if we are all one body. If they feel pain, we feel pain. If they cry, we cry. And if that victory doesn't instill happiness in us, there's a fundamental problem with our iman. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man lam yahtam bi umuri al-muslimina falaysa minhum." The one who doesn't give care and consideration to the affairs of the Muslims, he's not from them. So this is a direct lesson for us all to show this happiness and joy with what's happening in Syria currently. What are the lessons we can draw from this? The first lesson is the importance of grassroots work. What sparked off the revolution in the first place was the work of locals within Dar'a who wanted to protest against the injustice and freedom. And this grassroots work, over the course of time, it galvanized the biggest protest movement in Syria that was known to man. And over time, the Syrian people, they overgrew the Alawite regime and they overthrew them. And as Muslims living in the UK, there are many methods that we can use to raise awareness, especially when it comes to Syria. And when it comes to the people who are on the left, the anti-imperialists, they're still spreading lots of propaganda, trying to stop Muslims from rejoicing upon the victory of the Syrian people, telling us that these people are terrorists, or these people are both evil, the regime as well as the Syrian populace. And it's crucial we educate ourselves on this suffering. It's crucial we become bearers of justice, bearers of truth. We're able to debunk these theories and these lies and these fallacies. We're able to speak up for the Syrian people. Because if we can't physically assist them, the least we can do is verbally help them through raising awareness, through giving birth to discussions and movements and lectures and seminars that raise awareness and shed light on the reality of the Syrian suffering. And we've seen over time the effect that grassroots work has had on previous massacres and genocides throughout the course of history. And this is why it's very important for us to understand the impact that one person's words can have on an entire populace. Throughout the course of Islamic history, it's always been a few who've started to speak out against injustice. And over time, they gradually galvanize the support and the passion and the drive of tons of people, leading to eventually the victory of Allah to come. The second lesson that we learn is the importance of resilience and patience. We all go through different troubles in our day-to-day lives. Some of us, we're going through financial struggles. Some of us, we're going through a certain divorce. Some of us, we have issues with our parents. Some of us, we struggle with maintaining ties of kinship. Some of us, we're suffering from the loss of loved ones. Our troubles are very trivial compared to the troubles that the Syrians and the Palestinians are informing us of. It's very important that we draw parallels. The Prophet ﷺ, he said in one report, لا تنظروا انظروا إلى من هو أسفل منكم. That look to those who have less than you in this life. Look to those who are more unfortunate than you. Whenever we go through any trouble in this life, the Syrian people, their resolve, their resilience, their patience, despite having nothing, it's a direct lesson for us that our problems are nothing and yet we crumble. Our problems are minute, less, yet we complain. See, here we're taught that these people went through torture, they went through hell, and still Allah assisted them. He alleviated their burdens. What does that say for me and for you? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. The people think they'll be left alone to say that we believe and they won't be tested. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ. We tested those who came before you to distinguish the truth from the false. The sunnah of Allah upon this earth is suffering will never come to an end. Today the Syrian suffering is ended, but the Palestinian suffering continues. The Uyghur suffering continues. It's not about the suffering coming to an end. It's about the patience that we show in the face of struggle that really counts in the end. And the next point is supporting the Muslim suffering in moments of difficulty and moments of victory. Many of us, we came to know of the toppling of the regime on December the 8th, and before this we had no knowledge of the suffering that Syrian people had gone through. And that's a negligence on our part. We should be aware of what every Muslim is going through throughout the world. We are one body. And Allah will question us about this. For those of us who think we won't be questioned, then you're going to face a reality check when we stand before Allah. Because there are many reports that tell us we will be questioned about the suffering of all Muslims throughout the world and what we did within our own capacities to help them. In one hadith Qudsi, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah will say to the slave on the Day of Judgment that you never came to me when I needed food. And the slave will say, oh Allah, when did you need me? And Allah will respond that my slave who was suffering needed you. What did you do for him? These are confronting questions that we posited to each and every one of us. During the Battle of the Trench, which is the battle where the Muslims were under siege for countless days. They had no food, they had no drink. Fear had consumed them. Despair was visible among them. And amidst struggle, the Prophet ﷺ, he strikes a rock. And revelation came to him. And he started to inform the companions of conquests and victories that are going to come in the future for Muslims. And some hadith experts begged the question, why did revelation come to him amidst the most intensified moment of their lives, where they were under siege and occupation, where their lives were at stake, where they had no food or drink, teaching us that we have to help our brothers and sisters and care for their situations irrespective of our circumstances. It's a fundamental and pressing obligation upon us. And that care and concern cannot vanish. And in the day-to-day life of just going to work and fending for our families, we turn the blind eye to the suffering of those throughout the world. And it's a lesson that many struggles are to come and many unexpected victories are to surface. What role are we going to play in them? That's a crucial question. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه. الحمد لله الذي وحده وأسلم على من لا نبي بعده. Brothers and sisters, we live in a very consumerist society where content is consumed passively. We scroll through video to video, reel to reel, short to short, without internalizing the content. And it's the same when it comes to news concerning our brothers and our sisters. The least we can do if we're not physically there to assist them is to take care when we're reading about their affairs. Is to internalize what's happening to them, for that to really impact our day-to-day lives. For us to be driven to do something for them. For true care and true activism can only stem from proper care and proper empathy. If we don't have genuine empathy for what's happening to them, we'll continue our day-to-day lives turning a complete blind eye to the suffering of Muslims throughout the world. And that's what we're instructed to have, empathy. Every time we place a morsel of food in our mouths, we think about those who don't have food. Every time we sit with our families, we contemplate about those people who have no families, whose families have been massacred by the brutal Ba'athist Alawi regime in Syria. And this should be the question we ask ourselves throughout every facet of our lives. And it's one of the ways to establish one's faith. And this is being reported to us throughout various prophetic reports. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to internalize what's happening throughout the world. To allow us to be of those who carry out proper activism. To be of those who are carriers of justice and truth. To be of those who don't just speak about Iman, but they couple their speech with action. And to be of those who play a part in the Islamic uprising within their own capacities. And we ask Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, the all-hearing and the all-seeing, to assist our brothers and our sisters in Syria. We ask Allah to make Syria a place of peace, a place of residence, and a place of belonging for those who finally got back their homes after 5 or 6 years worth of suffering and genocide. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to assist those who are suffering throughout the world, those in Palestine, the Uyghur Muslims, those in Rohingya, and our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh who are also facing an unexpected uprising, who've overthrown the powers that treated the entire Bangladeshi populace with cruelty and barbaric treatment. It's also important we remember all of those suffering. We ask Allah to make us keys to goodness. أقول قولي هذا قوموا لصلاتكم يرحمكم الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Brothers, a few announcements, please. Firstly, we have some weekly activities that are going to be starting here at Rochdale Community Mosque. Firstly, on Mondays after Isha, there's a new program titled The Journey of the Soul that will take place every Monday, commencing from the upcoming Monday, where we talk about the nature of the soul, the state as it passes through after death, inspired by the famous work by Ibn al-Qayyim, Kitab al-Ruh. So all brothers and sisters are invited to take part in this class. Every Tuesdays, 11 a.m. till 12 p.m., we have the Tiny Treasures sessions for mothers and children aged between 0 to 4, and that will commence from the upcoming Tuesday, inshallah, and sisters are welcome to take part. On Tuesdays after Isha, we have tafsir in Bangla that will be taking place by Imam Kabir Hussain from Oldham, inshallah. Every Friday at 9 p.m., we have the Brothers Circle that takes place at 9 p.m., going through the 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. Refreshments and tea is also served. It's an opportunity to sit down with brothers, have discussions, to help each other, and also for brothers to find a place where they can confide in other people, given that everyone goes through difficulties and winding down is crucial. And last but not least, every Sunday after Isha, we have a new program starting called The Footsteps of the Beloved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where we'll be covering the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, during the Meccan period, discussing some of his sacrifices, his contributions, also going through his character traits and what made him a leader, what made him the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Last but not least, the car park appeal. A brother and sister have donated £1,000 each, taking our current total to £5,000. Railway Grow will be donating all their proceeds to our car park appeal on Boxing Day. So please save the date and attend to help us in paying off the loan for the car park. The outstanding amount now is £24,000 remaining. So if everybody could donate for Allah's sake for just 1 square meter of the car park, which amounts to £145, that would be greatly appreciated. It makes it easier for us to provide our services to those in the locality. Jazakumullahu khairan. Qumu li salatikum yarhamukumullah.